Okay, Daylene.
Oh my God, just call me Day.
I will. I do like Daylene though. You're the only Daylene I know, Day that I know. And actually, no, I do know another friend named Day. But I remember. I think when was the first time we met? Was it at Alm Yoga in Guatemala?
Yeah,
Outside.
outside. I don't remember if it was outside or inside.
This was about back when it because they've recently just moved the studio.
Yeah.
Um, but yes. So I guess we could just get started with you telling people, who you are, what your method consists of. Basically, you know, the audience who don't know who Day Christensen is and the Day One method. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'll do that. I think that, like, most people who know me or who have known me in the past know me as an Ashtanga teacher. I was practicing Ashtanga for many years. At this point, the way that Ashtanga blended into what I'm now calling the Day One Yoga method, that blurry area could span the past 7 or 8 years. How this sort of developed into what I'm now calling sort of my own practice. But of course, the discipline, um, and almost all the yoga I know started with this Ashtanga yoga, which of course many people know and practice all over the world. And so a little bit about Ashtanga is that Ashtanga is sort of known for being a very strong and athletic practice, and it is a set series. In fact, there are 6 series, and they're meant to be practiced in a certain order and a certain progression, et cetera, et cetera. And I was right along that path of progressing through the series, doing primary series, second series, third series. And I was making my way through third series. One of the sort of gateways or bridges from one series to another is something called TikToks, or
Oh,
you know a little bit about
yeah.
TikTok.
I remember you mentioning this. I remember you mentioned it's the backbending. Uh, uh, not a. It's not a pose, right? It's a kind of like a sequence, right?
Yeah, it's
In
like a
third series,
it's sort of the bridge between second and third,
right?
where or it's called Viparita Chakrasana.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, and basically what it is that you're going from down dog into a handstand and falling over into a back bend, and then from the back bend you flip back over to a handstand and then back down into down dog, and you're meant to do this 3 times in a succession of all other kinds of back bends. And then at the end you're meant to like cross your arms and give your body essentially to your teacher, who does a assisted back bend where you go backwards and you sort of trust that they're going to hold your weight up in a way 3 times. And then at the end, what you're meant to do eventually is walk your hands into your feet, like the deepest back bend that you would ever do in this entire sequence, and or eventually start actually catching your ankles or your legs or your shins or up your legs from the back.
right.
um, this is an absolutely, in my opinion, a ridiculous practice, because it is not sustainable. Okay, but it was through this sort of idea of progression and always having to get better. And well, if you can do this pose, then you must do the next one and the next one, the next one, and there's always this idea of getting better and better and better. And the idea of better is that you become not necessarily stronger, but you keep performing these sort of ridiculous or unattainable feats of flexibility. And I was a fairly flexible practitioner, especially in back bending, and I was getting along just fine, doing everything that I had to do. And but basically, when you get past a certain point in your practice, back bends become very dominant. And for a lot of people, especially girls, and a lot of people who practice yoga is women,
Yeah.
um, they can, what they lack in strength, they can make up for in flexibility. And that's often the place where a lot of yoga practitioners are sort of encouraged and congratulated.
Right. And motivated internally, right? To like, oh, I can do this. I'm good at this, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of this sort of instant gratification in being able to do something like that and feel like, oh, well, I can do something difficult. I can do something that most people can do. And flexibility is certainly, for many people, especially women, especially the younger women who practice, is the easiest path. In other words, trying to get stronger or work on your jump throughs or your jump backs or your handstands can be incredibly unrewarding if you're not strong. And it's,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's so much easier for
And
a lot of.
you find this, you find with a lot of practitioners that, I mean, that are really experienced, the aspect of strength is often lacking, right? It's something that I know you emphasize, and it seems like my impression of your technique is that, and actually, I think you have kind of a motto around the upper body kind of becoming more flexible. Sorry, the upper body becoming stronger and the lower body becoming more flexible, right? Which is kind of flipping, the classic primate walking on four uh, type of evolutionary viewpoint of a human being, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it is something I say in almost every sort of major workshop or course that I would teach is that all the yoga asana, which are the postures, all the yoga asanas that you do are really the primary aim is to make the lower half of your body, essentially your hips and your hamstrings, I will include, more flexible or more mobile. You're basically trying to make your lower half of the body maintain or even progress in terms of getting that full range of motion. And you're doing that through these weird pretzel like yoga postures. Whereas every single transition in between the posture, which is called vinyasa, every vinyasa that you do, you have these little moments where you're holding your weight in your arms and your hands exclusively. And those moments are equally as important to me as the asanas, because the asanas are making your hips more mobile, but the vinyasa, the jumping around, is ideally making your upper body more stable. Your shoulders act more like your hips. So it's these movements that are making your shoulders stable, and it's the postures, the static positions that are making your hips more mobile. And that's not new or let's say special to me or to what I teach. It should be inherent in the practice.
Right.
It's something that's overlooked for a lot of people
Why do you think that is?
because it's hard.
Really, yeah. I mean, in short, that's why. Just because it's. I would assume that people have it's. You would have to practice for years in order to get that developed to a point that it's allowing you to kind of flow through the practice the same way flexibility does in other aspects. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's mostly fair to say. I mean, for some people, of course, there are always exceptions to the rule. There are always people who are strong. There are always people who are incredible and hand balancers and holding their body weight. But for the vast majority of people who practice, what they see, if for instance, if you look at a cheat sheet, like a yoga sheet where it tells you what to do, what you're looking at is poses. You're
Right.
not, you can't photograph a vinyasa. So what's highlighted or emphasized is literally sort of these little marks or landmarks throughout the practice that you have, which are these postures. It's like, oh, well, I've achieved this posture, and then I'm going to achieve that posture, and then I'll achieve the next posture. But you're not seeing the thread that's connecting all of these postures, which of course is the transition, the vinyasa. And to me, as I said, it's equally as important.
Is the vinyasa for you? I mean, there's a lot of people, and I guess it really depends on how you look at your yoga and the practice and what it means for you in your life. But would the vinyasa kind of be the knitting together where you're able to kind of achieve that flow state during, you know, an Ashtanga series? For you, is that kind of what it means? Because it seems if you're not doing the vinyasas, if the vinyasas aren't kind of like just part of your practice, it really seems like it's going to be like very cut and dry each and every pose. It's kind of going to be like that poster that you're saying, right? It's not necessarily. Is that? Would you say that's?
It definitely was my experience when I first started doing the Shanga yoga practice. The first couple classes I took, I wasn't doing the transitions because who the hell would? It's your first time, you don't know what the hell it is, and it's a guided class. As most people experience yoga or Ashtanga yoga for the first time is through a guided class, which I think is also a little bit of a failure of the system. But when you're taking a guided class, again, it's just being told the poses to do and what to do it and when to do it, and you just try to keep up. And yes, it made for an incredibly choppy experience. Like you're just literally just like plopping your butt on the floor every minute or so, getting
Yeah.
up, down, plopping forward. It's a very sloppy and staccato experience if you're not understanding that fluid movement, that connection of movement between the postures. And it feels, truthfully, the first Ashtanga guided class I ever took, I mean, years back, we're going almost 2 decades back, is I thought it was boring. I thought Ashtanga was boring and I thought it was easy. And here's why I thought it was easy, because I wasn't doing half of the practice. I wasn't doing the jumps. I wasn't doing the jump throughs or the jump backs. I was at that point flexible enough to do the asanas. So
Right.
I was just doing one asana and then another asana and then another asana. It's like literally like, where's the workout? Where's the breath? Where's the connection? Where's the sweat? Where's the energy that's supposed to be generated from this was completely missing on me. And I was like, why do people do this practice? It's so boring and easy and dumb, you
And
know. And then I tried to do my first jump through, and I was like, oh, okay, that's where the work is.
right.
And I learned how to jump through and jump back, which when I figured that out, I I taught myself how to jump back in the matter of a few months. I was very, very determined
It's the
to.
best feeling, right? When you finally get it, that jump back.
Absolutely. And then I started to see the connection. And then when you have that connection, of course, there's the focus. You're
Right.
not distracted by other things, and then I really feel like whatever yoga is supposed to be for us, whatever sort of the zone that you're supposed to achieve whenever you're focused on any athletic endeavor or physical endeavor, is really what happens in the yoga when you're getting that vinyasa, that quote unquote, that flow. And the reason why people started teaching, in my opinion, the reason why people started teaching vinyasa flow, it actually started with Tim Miller, back in probably the 70s in California.
Is Tim
He
Miller the rocket yoga guy, or is that another guy?
That's another guy.
Yeah, okay.
Everybody sort of took their own. Everybody who practiced Ashtanga sort of either stayed completely traditional. Traditional isn't even a word that I should use, but
Why do you say that? Because you have a method that is so non-traditional, or
no, because tradition. If anybody argues with what you're practicing and says to you, it's not traditional, the response that I almost have is, what the hell is traditional? The practice has changed so much. If even if you're going through the quote unquote parampara or lineage of the Joyce family, from Krishnamacharya to Patabi Joyce to Saraswati to Manju to Sharat, and even within those teachers, the practice has changed subtly throughout the years, that what is being taught now as Ashtanga, traditional Ashtanga, was not even remotely close to how Patabi Joyce was teaching the practice, uh, 50 years ago.
Right.
So, so why? What is this idea of tradition? Um, people like to cling to a dogma as the way that people are religious. It's something that gives them, it's something to hold on to. It's something to belong to. It's something to say, hey, I'm a traditional Ashtanga practitioner, which gives me a reason. That means you should take me seriously. And you belong to a bigger thing, which we all want to belong to a bigger thing,
Right.
because that's family. We come from family, and we want to continue on in families, little tribes, communities, or when it gets scary, you can call it cults. But
Right. Right. Right.
it's all the same thing. We all want this little bubble of space where we feel like we belong. And so that's why people talk about tradition, because they want to belong to something, to a ritual, to a practice, the same way that people have Christmas dinner or whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have that bonding feeling. And that's,
Totally.
but it's no, there's no tradition, because again, what is being taught now and what was being taught then is almost black and white, apples and oranges. Yes, the postures have remained the same, but how they're taught, how they're counted, actually some of the postures have been removed. The series have been cut up differently. The vinyasa counts are completely different. So what is tradition? The
Yeah.
point is that actually anybody who practices Ashtanga or anything with a quote unquote guru or lineage, the truth is that they're really, everybody is doing their own interpretation of what they think that is anyway. It's how much are you willing to embrace your individuality, uh, for sacrificing for the idea of this larger structure, this bubble, this tradition, this lineage, and what is going to be sacrificed more? Is the tradition, quote unquote, tradition going to be sacrificed, or is your individuality going to be sacrificed? In either way, something has to be
Right.
sacrificed.
Totally. I I um I wanted to ask you, Day. So we have some people watching that aren't really too familiar with some of what you just described in terms of the lineage, the Ashtanga lineage, how that translates into today's yoga scene and all of the different deviations of said yoga scene. Could you explain briefly to somebody who doesn't really know, in short, what Ashtanga is, where it comes from, and why it's considered to be this like traditionalist, what would be the word, like not flagship, I would say almost like the go-to old school kind of yoga, right?
Yeah. And I'll try to put it in very simple sort of historical terms. So who we call the father of modern yoga, the father of modern yoga being the guy who brought yoga to the West, who opened up the practice to non-Brahmin men, the people who opened it up to white Western women, children, girls, boys, poor people, et cetera, and basically highlighted the practice that most of us consider yoga today, which is the asana practice, is Krishnamacharya, right? So Krishnamacharya had a couple of main students, two main students. He had more important students, but the two who had the biggest influence over modern yoga are BKS Iyengar and Sri K. Patabi Joyce. And if you took these two students or disciples from Krishnamacharya, you can almost put them on two opposite ends of the spectrum. The Iyengar practice was developed for its namesake, for BKS Iyengar, who was a guy who was not physically healthy. He was not well, he was not strong, he was actually mostly sick for the early half of his life. And so Krishnamacharya gave him a practice that was essentially like giving a cane to a guy who has difficulty walking. So the practice was, uh, you would be doing certain asanas, but you would be given props, as I said, like a cane. You would be
Right.
given straps, a bolster, here's a wall, sit against a chair, put your body in this position, and you don't actually have to be quote unquote strong enough to hold the position yourself, because we will strap you in, box you in, and put you in this position in order to do the posture in the perfect alignment. So, what Iyengar has been sort of known for now, what it's kind of grown into or evolved into, is quote unquote an alignment based practice. And that's partially true and partially not exactly what it is. Okay. And then the other side of the practice was the Patabi Joyce, Sri K. Patabi Joyce practice, which became the Ashtanga practice. And this practice was designed for Patabi Joyce, who was 12 years old when he started, a young, healthy boy who had a ton of energy. If you know any 12-year-old boys, or you can remember when you were a 12-year-old boy,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you probably had a lot of energy to burn,
I
right?
had a lot more energy than I do nowadays, that's for sure.
So this practice, which a lot of people, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people dismiss it or dislike it, is because they say, oh, this Ashtanga yoga was designed for 12-year-old boys. That means that's not meant for me, a 40-year-old woman or a 50-year-old woman or whatever it may be. This is just a practice for little boys, whatever it may be. And so this practice was a much more physical, active practice, jumping around and not necessarily alignment based, where you can do the poses and the poses are somewhat sloppy. You only hold them for 5 breaths, but you keep moving. It's a constant moving practice. Now, what's happened mostly in yoga in the West, what we experience it now, is that most of the yoga people practice is some hybrid of the two.
Right.
A little bit Iyengar, a little bit Ashtanga, a little bit of sloppy, messy, moving around, jumping around, and a little bit of, oh, here, let's have the perfect alignment in this moment, right?
Yes. Do you mean most yoga practitioners that aren't, how can I say this? That aren't really subscribed to the tradition of Ashtanga yoga, or do you mean within Ashtanga they, well, I guess that answers itself. That you mean people in general will do a little bit of vinyasa, they'll do a little bit of rocket, they'll do a little bit of Ashtanga, they'll do a little bit of everything, right?
Correct. And all those different styles, the hundreds of styles that now exist in the modern yoga asana practice, is essentially some blend of these two styles or traditions. So if you have a spectrum, Iyengar being on one far end and Ashtanga being on the other end, almost everything that we practice is sitting in the middle somewhere. In some classes, some styles are more towards this side, and some styles are more towards the other side. And the big tradition is, are you an Ashtanga practitioner or are you an Iyengar practitioner?
I
And
sometimes feel like it's like carnivore diet and vegans, you know?
yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, actually.
Just like, oh no, no, it's carnivore diet, and it's like it works for some people, you know, and then you have the vegans over here, and they both are like, no, 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 yours is wrong. But it seems to be, in my impression, and I have not been practicing nearly as long as you have, is that it's somewhere in the middle between the two. There's good things that you can take out of both of them, as is with most things in life.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, the practice in itself is kind of like this alive thing, right? It's not like poster child things that are, you know, just structure, just poses up on the, you know, the, you see these pictures of just the poses without the vinyasas. There's so much more to it beyond just the tradition, beyond just the actual poses. And I think that you know, Iyengar was almost like the vegan that only eats plants, and it works perfectly for him. You know what I mean? and
And
and then you have Patabi Joyce that, you know, was the carnivore diet that worked perfectly for him, and it's kind of just like somewhere in the middle. All of us are kind of trying, because I look at them both and I'm like, they both seem great. I have most of my experience in Ashtanga, and I've gotten hurt in Ashtanga. You know, I've had some serious like bodily setbacks practicing Ashtanga the way it's supposed to be practiced, right? And so, and that's why I was actually gravitated, towards you as a teacher and towards your method, because it's like, okay, here's this teacher that was a master in the Ashtanga method, but also understands the dangers of this method, right? Because it's kind of overlooked, like you were saying. So some people are so involved with the tradition, they're so involved with keeping, I guess, to its roots. Perhaps that's based in other motives, and I think all of what you're saying is just really overlooked because of that. They're so calcified in their idea that they have to follow these poses, and that's why I say it, until my body started responding, and I was like, "What? I'm doing something wrong here because body does not lie. Body is wise, right?"
So the idea for most people, and I'll speak on what you just said. The idea for most people when they embark on a yoga practice is because they think that the yoga will make them healthier or fitter. Okay, you can say it one of two ways.
Right.
But the idea is that the yoga is meant to improve the quality of their life. Otherwise, why the hell would you practice it, right? So the idea is embarking on a yoga practice should improve the quality of your life. But what I have found out from years of practicing, years of teaching, all of the students I've known throughout the world as I've traveled, is that many people, the majority of people, I ask this question: how many of you guys, when have more pain and more injury since you started yoga than prior to ever doing a down dog in your life?
That's
How
funny.
many people are experiencing more problems from the yoga? And 70-80% of people raise their hand and say, yes, I have more pain and more injuries now that I've been practicing than prior to practicing. So there, and of course I experienced that in my own body as well.
Me too.
And of course. And so there I was, it's sort of like what makes you disassociate the practice from your pain? What made you say, somehow justify continuing to do this practice that is hurting you? And I think the answer varies for different people. I think that there is a psychology behind it.
Yeah, totally, totally.
I definitely think that there are people who want to believe that the yoga is making them better. I think that there's a lot of people who want to follow a lot of advice, which I've heard from fellow yoga teachers, no names, is, oh, pain and injury is part of the process. There's sort of an opening that will occur when you have injury or whatever, and that you'll be able to become more opened or more spiritually enlightened. Uh,
Maybe pain, but not injury,
yeah,
right? Would that be fair to say?
yeah, I think so. And there's also a fine line between pain and discomfort.
Right.
I think it's something very, very important to do on a regular basis, a daily basis, is to do something uncomfortable, whether it be stretching or a cold shower or going for a run, or it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Nobody likes this shit, but we do it because of all the benefits, right? So there is a fine line that people don't recognize. Hey, you crossed way beyond the discomfort level that is meant to benefit your immune system, your health, your physique, et cetera, and you've gone the reverse direction. You're regressing. You're actually you're half crippled. You're barely walking. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally, totally. And it's weird. Years after, starting, I say years, but when I started, I advanced fairly quickly through the series. And coming back to the practice when I'm kind of like more absolved from those psychological, the psychology behind whatever it was that I was tripping on when I was, hurting myself doing these poses. It's like, man, if I'm being honest with myself and I'm starting right now, I can, barely get through like standing, what is it? Standing sequence in in first series, just standing sequence in first series. If you're doing it like justice, those poses are really intense poses. And then you go into sitting sequence, and there, for those who don't know, within the Ashtanga first series, there's various standing sequence poses. How many are there a day? Like 9 or 10, maybe?
In the standing,
Yeah.
uh,
It's,
I guess you could say that there's six, seven, eight, nine, 10 postures
yeah. So it's,
in the standing sequence.
yeah, and then into sitting sequence, which is going to be, it's much more intense flexibility wise, right? Because you're not able to use as much as your strength. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's kind of how I've interpreted it. Is that you're not your muscles aren't as engaged. You're on the floor, so you're able to really get deep into these postures. And like if you're not engaging the right muscles, which is something that your method really emphasizes, you are going to get hurt. And you go to an Ashtanga, any Ashtanga Mysore anywhere in the country, there's a large, alarming amount of people that are injured, right? That have injuries that bother them for long periods of time. And it's kind of like, right now how you're saying it, it's like Jesus, like people are practicing and they're worse off. They're suffering more
Yes,
because of.
but the dedicated might not tell you that.
Oh
They,
no, nobody's ever gonna say that. There's probably some people that are screaming right now. They probably got angry and left. But it's so true.
yeah,
It's so true.
absolutely true. And this idea, part of this is what made me feel the need to adapt. And it sounds really simple. It sounds like, oh, well, why didn't you just do that before? What took you so long to say, you know what, something about doing this isn't working, and let's change it, and let's find the best way to get people to alter the way that they, it's more about the way that you relate to the practice. So, one of the things that besides strength, which is huge, but one of the things that I've really considered is first of all muscle imbalance, which is I have a course called the Four Pillars. So here are the four pillars. Number one is muscle imbalance. And it's this idea that we're sort of driven physiologically by tighter, strong muscles in our body called tonic muscles.
Yes. Okay.
And then we have weak muscles in our body called phasic muscles. And that what happens if we were to consider ourselves, let's say, at your physical prime, somewhere between, I don't know, 18 and 22 years old, right? Most people who practice yoga are beyond their physical prime, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Most
Totally.
people start yoga in at least in their late 20s, if not 30s or 40s or 50s. So almost everybody who practices yoga is beyond their physical prime. Well, what happens when you sort of reach that to not put it so morbidly, but when you start to go on that downward slope beyond your physical prime, is that those tonic and phasic muscles start to grow further and further apart. There's a stronger disparity between the strength of the strong muscles or the tonic muscles and the weakness of the phasic muscles, where maybe when you're 20 or so, it's more like this. As you turn 30 or 40, it grows like this. And that just has to do with the natural effects of aging. And so, one of the things to acknowledge is that any physical endeavor you do, the primary goal, or let's say the end goal, is to work on strengthening the phasic muscles and to work on stretching the tonic muscles. Okay, so this is the idea of the first pillar. The second pillar has to do with the postural dysfunction and the movement pattern dysfunction that grows from an ever evolving muscle imbalance. And that could be mainly what I talk about is pelvic tilt, how pelvic tilt will affect mainly back pain and movement patterns in your shoulders and all kinds of things, but mainly dealing with pelvic tilting and back pain, and how if you are a posterior pelvic tilter, that doing a ton of forward bending is actually the worst thing you can do. And if you're an anterior pelvic tilter, doing a ton of back bending is probably the worst thing you can do.
And explain to people why that is, Dave.
So the pelvic tilt, if you can imagine, let's see if I can demonstrate a little bit. If your pelvis is like a bowl, right? You can see actually that I'm an anterior pelvic tilter just from standing here. But if my pelvis is my pubic bone, my two hip bones, and my sacrum, and I were to draw a line, like connect the dots, imagine my pelvis as a bowl, and I've just outlined the rim of the bowl. If my pelvis tips forward, which is anterior, what will happen is a deeper hip flexion and deeper spinal extension. Okay? If your pelvis tilts backwards, which is taking the contents of the bowl as if you were drinking,
Mm-hmm.
and basically you reduce the arch of your lumbar spine. Your lumbar spine almost goes flat. Your back goes into an element of flexion, and your hip flexion is reduced.
This is more of a guy issue, right? Usually men have this issue, and women tend to have the. I remember the really flexible yoga girl uh,
Yeah,
meme.
that's that's usually the archetype. The idea
Yeah.
is you have the tight new guy syndrome is what I call it, which is
Yes.
posterior pelvic tilting, and the
Yeah.
cute flexible yoga girl is the anterior pelvic tilting. But the truth is that tight guys have APT, and girls also have PPT.
Yeah.
Uh, for instance, I'll give you an example of a really cute, flexible girl archetype who would be a posterior pelvic tilter, and that is anyone who has been indoctrinated in the art of ballet. They're almost 99% of ballerinas are posterior pelvic tilters
Yeah.
because excessive turnout, the tucking of the tail, et cetera, et cetera. And they've been conditioned into doing it. And there's another one which would be the woman, the career woman, or the woman, the fashionista who wears high heels all the time would be a posterior pelvic tilter. So yes, there is a little bit. I do that joke of the new guy and the flexible yoga girl, but it could be either way. And here's an example of a guy who could be APT. Anyone who has spent a good amount of time in their life doing weightlifting, cross,
Yes.
et cetera, the over exaggeration, the overemphasis of keeping a flat back, lifting heavy weights, um, squatting, cleans, snatches, et cetera, all the things that you would do in a CrossFit class or in any sort of a Olympic style weightlifting, where you're picking up weight from the floor and bringing it overhead, is indoctrinated in being an anterior pelvic tilter. And a tight guy who maybe has a background in weightlifting can come into a yoga class and you would see him as a tight guy, but he's an anterior pelvic tilter. Either way, whether you're PPT or APT, you're going to wind up with back pain
Yeah.
some point in your life, whether it's in a year from now or 10 or 20 years from now, because it's if you're an APT person, your back is in constant extension, which means those back muscles never get a chance to release. If you're a posterior pelvic tilter, your spine is in almost constant flexion, which means that you're putting too much pressure on the front side of your discs, which means that you never get a chance to almost stand upright.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Day, I was going to ask you, uh, is is it really only going to be? How can I say this? Is there one worse than the other in terms of? No, they're both going to give you issues.
They're both horrible, but they're both horrible. They're both going to give you issues. But one of the things that I noticed in as a trend in the fitness world, yoga included, is that everything is designed or geared as if every single student or athlete that walked into the room doing whatever physical exercise, in this case yoga, if every student walked into the room, the teacher has been conditioned to view every student as potentially one of two things. Number one, either a posterior pelvic tilter, because there's a very strong overemphasis again on keeping your spine flat keeping that straight spine. Don't let any rounding happen whatsoever. God forbid your back rounds, etc., etc.
That's like the classic stand like uncomfortably with your chest out. That's gonna be healthy for you, even though you can feel your lumbar spine like collapsing under you.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Or the assumption is that the student standing in front of you is absolutely perfect, and there's no consistency with the verbal cues. It's either you're perfect or you're a posterior pelvic tilter.
Right.
The anterior pelvic tilters, there has been no verbal instruction or even awareness of what to do for an anterior pelvic tilter. People don't understand it and they don't verbally cue for it. And the truth is that, in my opinion, guided yoga classes should be done away with completely, because every single individual needs a specific set of verbal instruction and postures that would actually be what the yoga is supposed to do, which is to improve the quality of your life. So if we're all doing this cookie cutter practice, which I understand the theory behind it, the only thing that makes it ineffective is that we can all do a cookie cutter practice. We can all do the same poses, but we should be doing them in a different way, in a
Yes.
slightly different way. And that part is misunderstood, eliminated, or dismissed.
Right, right. And then that's something that within your method you emphasize, right? It's whatever you're doing, certain poses that are usually idealized in a certain context, like what you're saying, to have that back, when you're grabbing what is it? Just a basic touch your toes, if you're sitting on the ground. There's a lot of emphasis around getting your back kind of like arched in, getting your chest out, and you kind of say the opposite, right? To not necessarily all the time, but for the majority of the cases, like you're saying, people already have that overcompensation and kind of need a different type of engagement.
That's right. So the majority of people, even though the majority of instruction around fitness and yoga is geared towards saving the posterior pelvic tilters too much rounding in the back, the actual statistics are that there are more anterior pelvic tilters than there are posterior pelvic tilters, which means that all the instruction that we're given, keeping your back, your spine straight, overarching, overextending, is actually going to make your problems, your injury, and your pain worse. And that
Yeah,
is so huge because it's something so small. People don't recognize it as being the problem,
yeah,
right?
totally.
They look at big things as being the problem. Oh well, I hurt myself doing putting both legs behind my head, so I'll never do that again. But they continue the pattern that was harmful. It doesn't matter if the pose is big or small. What matters is the repetition. Are you doing the same movement over and over and over again, not only throughout your practice, but then throughout your life? And that's what's causing the pain. So pain, understanding pain through postural dysfunction and how to correct it, you could sort of say, is the pillar two, right? In the four pillars of the day one yoga method. This is something that I strongly consider. And I want to make sure that every single student is doing poses that are beneficial and not harmful to them. And so basically the idea then becomes the postures are absolutely fine. It's not the posture's fault. It's the order in which we do the postures and how we do the postures. So in other words, if I had a very tight guy, which you could probably relate to a little bit, right, Will?
I'm tight these days. I am pretty tight. I will not deny you that one. It's been a while. I haven't been practicing as much as I used to.
Right. So almost everybody can relate to being a tight guy
Yeah,
at
yeah,
one
yeah.
time in life with their practice. So if you are a posterior pelvic tilter, classic tight guy, hunching, rounding in the back, poor posture, what we consider poor posture usually, the sort of old guy with a cane type body type, a little bit too round, a little bit too hunched over. And you have a guy like that come into a yoga class and it's a the way that I would teach it would be a Mysore style yoga class.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, what I would have him start with is more spinal extension, working on let's say the first 8 postures of second series would be hundreds of times better and more beneficial for a guy with this body type than starting with primary series. So the idea is to take the practice, which was once this linear road towards quote unquote greatness, is actually the better way to do it is say, well, you fit these postures better here. So I'm going to take these postures and give them to you. And then these postures over here, they should be given to you. And it doesn't matter what series they're from. It's all about what is beneficial to the person who's standing in front of me.
Right.
And there's a variety of different reasons and explanations for that. So the modular practice versus the linear practice is basically what was born from
And
all.
and Day, do you have students where you've basically been like, all right, you're gonna incorporate these poses from second series, or just start with second series? Because that's like super big red flag. Any Ashtangi yogi that's listening right now is going to be like, or rolling over in their grave or out of their mind, thinking that somebody can skip primary series and jump straight to secondary series, not having done yoga ever before. Is this something that you commonly recommend, or that you've seen work very well within your own students?
Yeah, so I actually have an example, and absolutely, this is one of the major reasons why I had to completely separate myself from this idea of Ashtanga yoga, because everybody, there's a joke about it, the Ashtanga yoga police, but every teacher is policing other teachers. Oh, you can't teach this. Oh, the practice is this way. Oh, it's meant to be like this. And the truth is, I don't really give a fuck. All I'm about is that, am I helping the person who's standing in front of me?
Yeah,
Is the relationship mutually beneficial? And that's a
totally.
big thing that's missing in the student teacher experience. I know from being a student is that a lot of times I was giving my money to the teacher and they were giving me jack shit in return. Something that was not useful, not helpful, that wound up hurting me or wound up putting me in sort of a tailspin because I didn't know what I was doing and I had to do this trial and error and figure it out. And it's like, well, what did I need you for? Right? So the idea is that when you are a yoga student, the yoga student and the yoga teacher should have a relationship, should have an experience that is mutually beneficial, meaning that the teacher should impart some information that will be useful to the student. And rather than just saying, well, you know what, it's like a cookie cutter, I'm trying to fit every single round peg into a square hole, it's not going to work for everybody and it will not be beneficial to everybody. In fact, it will be not beneficial to most. So the idea is that you have to make sure as a teacher that you're doing the best you can for your student, regardless of whatever lineage or tradition or practice said. All right. And then the student, in return, of course, supports the teacher by whatever, patronizing their yoga studio or paying for their classes online or whatever it is. And that's the benefit. There's the mutual benefit. So the point is that I had to remove myself completely from the policing group of people who are really concerned about the idea of lineage. I want to say this. It is not the student who serves the practice. In other words, it is not the student who should bend to the rules of the practice, but it is the other way around. It is the yoga practice that should serve the student. And it is the yoga practice that should bend and shape according to the needs of the student, not the other way around. And that is a major shift from the way yoga is taught, especially in these quote unquote traditional styles.
Totally.
Everything is to serve the machine, to serve the machine, to serve the Ashtanga machine. And you know what? Fuck that. Who's getting paid off of all of this? Who's getting the benefit? It's not me, it's not the student.
Yeah.
So have to change the paradigm, and that's where the day one yoga method attempts to come in and say, let's change all this.
Your method for me was like this, because when I met you, I was getting into Ashtanga, and I started practicing again when you came back to Guatemala. But I kind of came back to your method after I had so many injuries. I was like, dude, I'm doing basic poses and it hurts. And then I remembered certain things that you had told me, within downward dog, engage these muscles, don't engage these muscles. And it was like, these are the muscles I need to engage because I have so much like tightness and strain in certain muscles that are typically, not even emphasized or talked about in these basic poses. So that's one thing too, is like, these are your method for me was like, okay, my body is like screaming for this stuff. If I hadn't heard of you, I would have no idea, but it was like, it kind of gave me this framework of understanding like, okay, I can engage this muscle, and it's going to be, the rest of my day, these muscles, let's say the traps, they're going to be tight because I'm on the computer, I'm doing things that are counter to, those muscles being counter engaged, I guess, for lack of a better term. And it's just kind of like overlooked. It's kind of sad, there's so many people out there, and I guess, that's where your role comes in, where not advertising, you're advocating for a lot of how can I say this, a lot of the different basic poses to really kind of be modified, and not only the poses, the actual series in itself, the whole practice, because there is a very like stringent outlook on how you should do a downward dog, or how you should do a any of the vinyasa poses, and a lot of it leads to injury. So it's definitely something that I think, I don't know what it is. It's always the psychology behind it would be interesting. I think it's like an ego thing. I know for me, I was like, I could do this. This could be something I could get really good at. And if I've had any things that have made me feel inadequate in my life, I mean, I'm good at yoga. That's cool too, right? It's like, that was for me. It was like, well, I can do these poses. I'm getting hurt, but it's still super cool. I can touch my toes now. I can do these crazy back bends. And it was like, I think for a lot of people, they missed the entire point. I know I did, and it's kind of scary, right? And that's awesome. It's something that, yeah, in general, Ashtanga in that sense, because the system is so cool in itself, right? These people thought it up in India, and they contrived this like multi-layer system that in theory helps with your digestion, and helps to like open your heart in second series, and helps with strength, and helps all of these things that modern medicine, modern exercise, we're not even close to getting to. So what do you think? Is it in Ashtanga, do you consider within your method that you honor that aspect of the good within the practice, within the system, and try and modify
Yeah.
where it needs to be modified?
Yeah. I mean, essentially, I still do quote unquote Ashtanga every day. But the only thing is that number one, I have an awareness of trying to engage muscles that wouldn't normally want to engage. So that's what I was talking about, is working on engaging phasic muscles, which requires a bit of conscious thought, whereas tonic muscles like the traps will engage without you thinking about it. So I still do pretty much in Ashtanga practice. I've, but I do it in a modular way. I've completely eliminated whole sections of the series that I've learned throughout the years that include back bending, because I'm an anterior pelvic tilter. So I've completely eliminated back bending to the point where I don't even do up dog anymore.
Oh,
Uh,
really? That's so interesting.
yeah, I just do a push up. And even it's been a while since you've practiced with me.
I was
I've
gonna ask you about that.
modified more and more and more than what you.
Wow. So because, sorry to interrupt. I remember that when I was last practicing with you, when I was like in my practice, you were mostly doing primary series, even though you were a third series practitioner. You were very well developed in the Ashtanga system. And I found that so interesting. And I, it was something that I kept as a teaching for myself, going, further into the practice. Like, Day is this like yoga professional, and she does primary series, and primary series is like, so like everybody wants to get out of primary series, but I always saw primary series as like this super complete, like I don't feel like I need anything else. And when I heard you say that, it was like, wow, this is so refreshing. It's like, so you've even gone further now. You've modified your
I
practice to.
Yeah, I can tell you exactly what my practice looks like. Um, I practice like 6 days a week, and usually, not always, but usually for 4 days, I practice like half primary, sometimes through like Garbha sometimes the second half of primary, but pretty much half primary, jumping back, jumping through all those boring seated forward bends that people aren't that interested in. I do because it's very therapeutic and healing for my back as an anterior pelvic tilter, right? And then 1 day a week, I practice second series, but I start second series on the 11th posture, which is Bakasana. And I practice second series from Bakasana to Karandavasana, okay? And which is essentially, again, a practice of almost entirely forward bending, deep forward bending. Again, very good, very therapeutic for an anterior pelvic tilter. And then the last day, or the first day, depending on how you look at it, is I will practice third series through the arm balances. So that's about 2/3 of third series. And then I'll
Wow.
go back to primary series. And the reason why primary series is so important and good for me is because number one, the postures are simple. Relatively speaking, the postures are simple. And the vinyasas are difficult.
Yeah, it almost seems like they shouldn't even be in practice because nobody can do them. Like you see all of these like girls that have been practicing 2 years, 3 years, and it's like they cannot do the jump throughs or the jump backs, and yeah, it's kind of inconsistent in a sense, and it makes sense, right? Because it's what you said. These were designed for 12-year-olds in India who, had the type of body that allows them at the same time to be extremely flexible but still maintain that strength. It's like the perfect, not perfect, but you know what I mean. The ideal yoga, Ashtanga yoga body that doesn't necessarily translate into Western culture, right?
Not at all translate, but yes, we try.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but if you look at the body type and the structure of young Indian boys versus the majority of the Western world, we couldn't be anything further than different from the people who are practicing that series. Not to say that we shouldn't practice it or that there isn't something worthy to take away from it. There is. It's just learning to figure out what is right for you, and also just the nice way of saying it is sifting through a lot of the junk that people say just because they're regurgitating information that they've heard. It's a game of telephone among the teachers. Well, my teacher said this. Well, and then it goes on and on through this line of teachers, and what you wind up with at the end of the round is of the game is a completely different message than what was conveyed in the beginning. And that
Yes.
happens, it's misinterpreted, it's misunderstood, it's embellished mostly. It's embellished so much because 90% of the time, our quote unquote Indian teachers, our gurus, barely say anything about how to do the pose or what to do in the pose. All they do is say the asana name and the vinyasa count. There's no real instruction. So all of this instruction is embellishment and fabrication and interpretation of the original message. And so to that I say again, where the hell is the tradition?
And Day, the tradition, back in the day when Patabi Joyce, was the head guy, it was a lot different than it is right now with Sharad, and for people who don't know, Sharad and Patabi are kind of like the leaders of the Ashtanga not kind of, they are, right? They're the what's the term, the guru, the head guru term, Day? I don't know, but they're Sharat is Patabi Joyce's son, and Day, what she was talking about was that Patabi became one of the two principal pupils of Krishnamacharya and took over this Ashtanga system, took pupils under his arm, and he had various pupils that he was very in, and correct me if I'm wrong, very in close contact with, right? Like he did do like the on the touch instruction, and he would modify your poses, and he was probably very gifted in feeling and connecting with his students, knowing where they were lacking, and adjusting in ways that most teachers today probably cannot do, right? What do you
Yeah,
think about that?
yeah. There's a giant elephant in the room right now. It just entered, which which is that Patabi Joyce, since his passing, which was several years ago, back in 2009, Patabi Joyce passed away. And with the sort of the whole Me Too movement coming to light, a lot of things happened. A lot of people have come forth with their stories and their relationship to Patabi Joyce, and have said that he has touched them too much, has touched them inappropriately, has taken advantage of the power position, the role that he had as a teacher, and it was absolutely inappropriate, and it was confirmed
Oh,
by.
really?
Yes, it was absolutely confirmed. Besides the number of people who have come forth saying it, it was indeed confirmed through a statement, a very brief statement that Sharat made, which essentially excused himself from any responsibility, by saying that he was too young to know what to do, or to be able to do anything about it anyway.
And
And he
Day, just to be clear, this statement, was it more of like I was there and I'm sorry this happened, or was it like Sharat kind of like Sharat? And I'm asking this out of like pure spec. Sharat would never throw Patabi under the bus, like out of like I want to be the guru now, and like do you see it like that could be a possibility, or is it mostly look I was there and this happened and I was young and I didn't know what to do? Is it that kind of confirmation, or did Chirac come out and say, "Hey, yes, you guys are right"? Like conform more of a conforming thing. Do you know what I mean?
the former, not the latter. He was definitely more absolving himself as responsibility for being young and unaware
Okay,
of.
so it
But
definitely happened, and it's been confirmed. Okay, that's I actually I had heard the speculation, and I think there was like a video or something that came out too
yeah,
oh, so that's new, not new to me. I had heard that, but that it had been confirmed and denounced by Sharat. That's
yeah,
crazy.
and that is. I'm not saying that all people who practice Ashtanga should take that information and completely reject the practice now that they realize that their guru was not quite the enlightened human that they thought he was. Because again, I'm willing to recognize the positives and the benefits from the practice. But what I'm trying to say is that, listen, not only is your guru not perfect, but the practice is not perfect. And let's not cling so tightly to rules for the sake of rules. Rules are there to be able to help you navigate, to guide the practice. But again, it should not be the student in service of the practice. That is when it becomes a cult like worship. But
Totally.
it should be the practice that is in servitude to the students. And I really, truly feel that in the large majority, it is not. And so, what I'm saying to you is if you can recognize that you have an imperfect guru, also recognize that you have an imperfect practice. This is made up by humans. We're all humans. Let's try and extract the good out of it and do what feels like the most intelligent sort of route for you as a teacher and as a practitioner. and let's not stick so strongly to these ideals that don't really exist.
Yeah.
So
It's it's an interesting endeavor day because a lot of traditions, and it's funny because I was talking to one of my good hippie friends, and he was talking to me about the age of Aquarius and how we're dawning on the age of Aquarius. I think it's the 25th is technically the next the age of Aquarius, right? And what the age of Aquarius, what he was explaining to me, signifies is kind of the end of all of these structural uh, traditions that we've all become so attached to, and that we're kind of coming out of. Aquarius is an air sign; it represents fluidity and movement, and that we are, kind of moving out of those archetypal structures and taking, the good and what we now have in our present wisdom and kind of adapting them all. And the same thing, I wonder about a lot of different traditions. I've kind of seen this, the political system in the United States would be another example where we're just like, what the hell is happening? More on, I guess, a macro scale, but this, what you're telling me right now with Ashtanga, it's kind of the same thing, right? It's like, there's been people for decades, I don't know, even maybe you could say a century now. I don't know what was Krishnamacharya, like in the early 20s, right? He was born, but it was, we're kind of coming out of it. And I think for a lot of people, that's like hard to accept. For me, it's hard to accept. I'm not even like an Ashtanga yogi guy. And it's still like, it's always kind of like hollow ground for me where it's like, whoa, are we, are you guys just doing this because you know what you want to do it, or are you doing it because it's actually going to do justice to the system and the students that are part of that system? It sounds in this case, I wouldn't say it sounds without a doubt to me, it sounds like that it is. And
yeah.
I think in general it's something that a lot of people have a hard time with, right? It's kind of goes back on what you said before. It kind of dissolves that structural component that people have, and that they have this sense of belonging and this tribal this attachment to it. and
Yeah.
and and for a lot of people, that's the structure, that's their framework, that's their fabric, right? So you take that away, it's like, well, what the hell am I? A lot of people aren't really willing or ready to go down that road. So I think in that sense, it's where it becomes problematic.
Oh yeah, it's a big problem. It looks what some. I mean, this sounds ridiculous. First of all, we're having a conversation about yoga. Like, really, most people are like, "Who the hell cares?" Like, it's not a big deal. It's not, like you said, it's not politics. It's not our government. It's not what's going on in the world. Like, really, who gives a shit about yoga in the long run? But what I want to say is that exactly what you're saying, when you have a certain system in place, the system, whether we're talking about Ashtanga yoga, or we're talking about the government, or we're talking about whatever, the system feels like security.
Yeah.
It feels like a big, heavy, comfy security blanket. And when you start to pull that apart for people, what they see, what it looks like initially, including in my own mind, when this all started to unravel for me, looks like complete chaos and anarchy. It looks like, oh my God, what am I going to do if I don't have this practice? Am I ever, this is my life, this is my career. I practice 6, 7 days a week. I live it, I eat it, I sleep it, I drink it. I mean, what am I going to do if I no longer believe in the system that was holding me? And that's when I started to really, first of all, it's a little bit of soul searching. You have to think about, why are you really in this? Are you in it for the idea so that you can say, hey, I'm an authorized Ashtanga teacher? Or are you in it because of the feeling, the health, the wellness that it brings? And that's, I had to actually go back to my original intention in all of this, was to, and here it is, was to be a healthy person who was happy living inside of my body. That was it. I did not want my body to feel like a prison. I wanted to feel free, a sense of freedom in my body. And then, of course, why did I become a yoga teacher? Was to be able to share that with others. And that's it. So whenever you feel like your world is unraveling and it feels like complete anarchy or chaos, you just have to go back. And this is overly simplified, but you have to go back to your original intention. You have to go back to your personal truth. And that's all that I'm basically advocating is, listen, if you're teaching Ashtanga because you truly, honest to God, believe that this is the correct path to share through you to your students as an Ashtanga teacher, God bless, do that. But if you feel like you want to, quote unquote, um, diverge from tradition in any way, you should feel the freedom to do so. And go ahead. That everybody, we should all have this freedom.
Totally.
Um, and again, it's all about the servitude the of being in service to the practitioner and not the other way around.
A lot of people, it's interesting because what you're saying, a lot of people will find that that almost like reinvigorates their practice. Would you agree? That whole like that look, that scope of like, okay, this is this is actually what I'm doing. For me, it was like, whoa, okay, I really like yoga when it doesn't hurt. I like it so much more. I mean, I'm doing poses that I used to get yelled at for doing, right? I would get yelled at for doing class certain poses, if I had to modify because I had tension. It's like, whoa, if I, do my uh warrior pose with my arms open, my traps don't kill me, throughout the day because there's less tension or whatever. And it just reinvigorated my practice, it made me excited to do yoga, right?
Yes, absolutely. If you can, it's basically as a student and as a teacher, either way, it's basically the idea of carving your own way, but carving your own way with some education behind it. Okay, so because many people do not know, don't know enough about yoga, don't know enough about their bodies to be able to practice in the way that feels the best for them.
Yes.
So there has to be, and this is what I feel my role is as a yoga teacher, is there has to be some sort of education that I'm imparting to the student to make them be able to make their own informed decision. So this is part of the day one yoga method, is that there is no method. The method is do what works for you, but here, let me help you, educate you, give you some options so that you can understand and make the best choice. So as a teacher, really that's your role. You're facilitating that. You're facilitating the information, the education, so that the student can go and choose for themselves, or to have a collaborative sort of choice with their teacher for what is the best quote unquote practice that they should be working on.
Yeah, and it's just such a different time, Dave, from like when yoga started, in the 20s. It was, I should say, modern day yoga, right? I'm sure yoga's been along for a long time, but this particular school branch of yoga, we didn't know enough. We didn't know a lot about anatomy, and anatomy is a huge part of your practice, right? Of your method. There's certain muscles. You know how they're engaged. You know the difference between tonic and phasic muscles, and all of this stuff is huge when you're practicing. I mean, you need to know what the serratus is and what the serratus does, and things that a lot of just because, and it's almost like within, for example, Ashtanga, the tradition in itself doesn't really allow for that expansion of perspective. You're not concerned with anatomy. You're concerned with bandhas, and you're concerned with all of these things that may or may not be physically represented in the body. And I know you have your thoughts on bandhas.
Right.
You can share them with us if you like. I know they're. I actually wanted to ask you about that because Richard Freeman has his course in Denver, right? Who he does like this. Have you heard of this? He opens up bodies, right? He has a morgue. I don't know if it's at a morgue or they go to the morgue, and he opens up the bodies and he shows the people at the retreat where the bandhas are. Have you heard of this?
I may have caught wind of this, that this exists.
We gotta ask. Gabby knows about it. Shout out to Gabby. We gotta ask Gabby about this because she was telling me about this, and I was like, who I would love to talk to about this is Day, because she she has her ideas on bandas, and rightly so, right? Because you're an anatomy teacher, right? You know about anatomy.
Well, banda is literally means lock, that in Sanskrit, right? Um, and the idea of bandas is, um, it's vague at best. Okay, it's not exact. Like saying, if you're speaking about the body and you're speaking about engaging a certain muscle, what would be precise would be to say contract your triceps, uh, contract your quadriceps, or lengthen your bicep, or lengthen your hamstring. That, like, I'm being simple. I'm speaking in simple, clear, specific terms. Okay, but when you say something like a banda, and you just say, and especially now you're using an ancient language of Sanskrit, and you're saying mula banda. Nobody knows what that means. You say Uddiyana Bandha. Nobody knows what that means. Or people have their, again, it's their interpretation. It's okay, this is my interpretation of the word Bandha. Bandha, again, is lock. Mula Bandha is the root chakra lock. Some people say that Mula Bandha is Guruji, Patabi Joyce in the Shanga lineage said that Mula Bandha was contracting your anus. Many teachers that I've come in contact with who are relatively with it say that Mula Bandha is contracting the perineum. Other people say that it is like doing Kegels exercises. Other people say it is as if you were contracting and restricting the flow of urine. Nobody knows what this is. And essentially, it could be 4 or 5 different things. It could be all the things. It could be some combination of the things. We don't know what it is. And the reason why we don't know what it is because the language is imprecise. And that's what I don't like about it. And because the language is imprecise, because it is this, again, it's Sanskrit, it's not a spoken language. Nobody speaks Sanskrit conversationally.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to say, to act as if you are a wonderful scholarly teacher. And if a teacher has a student who says, "Excuse me, I would like to know how to jump back," and the teacher can jump back. They say, "Oh, you just lift and then you jump back." And they say, "Oh, but teacher, how?" And the teacher responds with something like, "Oh, engage Mula Bandha, engage Uddiyana Bandha, lift up, jump back." Now suddenly, do you have your answer? Is it all perfectly clear? No, what this is a way for teachers to not actually have to understand the mechanics of movement, to not have to understand how to explain something to their student, to not give them real practical step-by-step advice. It's a way of turning the entire thing into some big esoteric hoax. Well, I can do it because I'm enlightened and I have bandhas, but you can't do it because you're just this lowly student who doesn't know how to lift your ass off of the floor. And to that, I say that there is a real hierarchy among teachers and students, because number one, the teachers just explain away with this sort of imprecise, esoteric fluff that it's become. I'm not saying that bandhas don't exist, but I'm saying that the way that people interpret them, talk about them, and use them as if they were the somehow magical key to unlocking everything in your practice is total madness. And it's a complete lie. Total lie.
Let me ask you. So you've been practicing for a long time,
Yeah.
and in your practice, in your body, when you're doing something that would in tradition be described as where you need to engage one of these bandhas, have you found an explanation, or do you have your suspicion of what it could be? You said various things just a moment ago, but if you had to put it on one thing, the Kegel, or contracting your anus, whatever it may be, do you have one that you have in mind that it may be, or is it all of them, or do you not know?
the truth is that everybody, the saying, the quote unquote cute yoga saying, that's always mula bandha. You always are engaging mula bandha. You
Uh-huh.
should always engage mula bandha in your yoga practice and in life. The answer is that you are. You already are. Currently, right now.
That's
Think of
interesting because yeah, because when you see, when somebody dies, the last thing they do is disengage Bula Banda, right? And that's why the last thing they do is uh, shit,
yeah.
for lack of a better term. But is that why that is?
Yeah.
That's the first thing I think of.
Yes. The people who do not have mula bandha activated are the people who have accidents.
Right. That's
Okay?
true. Totally.
That's it. Those are the people. So this can happen. I'm not saying this to be dismissive or derogatory.
No, no, you're right on.
Yeah, the people who do not have mula bandha engaged are people, oftentimes women who have just given birth, have a hard time, who often have little accidents, little mistakes, little things like that, with accidentally urinating or whatever. And then the other people are elderly people who have lost that, and for whatever reason, lack of activity, lack of whatever, old age, whatever you want to call it. And those are the elderly people, or the sick people who need adult diapers, who need depends. Those are the people who do not have active mula bandha.
Interesting.
Is it
Yeah.
something you have to think about
No,
as a
no.
person? No.
I guess the question would be, Days, if the engagement that they're asking or advertising is even more than the natural
No.
Mula
It
Band.
should not, it should not be. And if it is, if you are thinking about it, it's a distraction from what really needs to be done.
It is.
Which,
It seems almost like impossible to do that, like to keep your Mula Band engaged throughout the whole. And I mean, I don't doubt the thing that I always think about, not always, but I ponder at times is like these guys that were starting the yoga lineage, like they were freaks. They were like physical freaks. You know, I was watching. I'm a golfer, and I was watching Jack Nicklaus, who's one of the greatest golfers of all time, and he would say like, look, when I was lined up to the swing, most people they can only keep one swing thought in their mind when they're doing their swing, and a casual golfer that's usually what it's limited to. He could keep five. He had five swing thoughts, and he could execute all of them during this golf swing perfectly. And he's one of the greatest golfers of all time. And it's like, could these guys be so physically and mentally? You hear Krishnamacharya had some incredible abilities with lowering his heart rate, affecting his autonomous central nervous system in ways that most ordinary people don't even dream of doing. Could it be that they're like tapped into some like crazy uh, self-observant vibration that allows them to do these things that normal people wouldn't be able to do in their yoga practice?
um, yes and no. Yes, that is possible. That people who are people like the sadhus, the saints, and the OG, the original gurus, Krishnamacharya, I would include in that category. Somebody who could actually control their autonomous nervous system, slow their heart rate, slow their breathing to the point of being, beyond almost to the point of death, right? But still maintaining being alive. I mean, phenomenal feats. You can say that Wim Hof is the modern day guru who is able to withstand ridiculous cold temperatures, to be injected with Ebola virus, and to be able to through his thoughts and his breathing, reject the virus when 200 other participants got sick. So yes, there is absolute validity to that we humans are actually capable of much more than we know. For sure, I know that is absolutely undisputed. That's a fact, and we all have the potential to tap into that, even if we haven't done it. But to answer that question in terms of Mula Bandha, no, I don't think that, oh, well, Krishnamacharya slowed his heart rate And the way that he achieved it was by engaging Mula Bandha for 48 hours straight. And that, you know what I'm saying?
I do. What I'm saying though is that he because like I can do it maybe for a pose, like I can have that conscious mula bandha extra contraction that we're talking about is more than what you need to do. But if somebody was a freak like Krishnamacharya was, in theory they could maintain that over contraction of mula bandha for the duration of their practice.
Yes, but the question is, why would you want to?
That's yeah. Say again.
The question is, why would you want to, and what does it do for you? And in my opinion, this is just my opinion, it's just a belief, and you can do a little bit of research on it yourself. But through some of the things that I've sort of come to find, through a little bit of reading and figuring, experimenting, and whatever else, is that actually doing that could be to your detriment, not to your benefit. So why would you want to do that? It's like, essentially, it's what I'm saying. It's contracting a tight muscle. It's contracting a tonic muscle. It's like you and your traps, and saying, my traps are actually always somewhat active. Let's say they're 2% toned, at least 90, 95% of the day. And knowing that, oh, I have very tight, very tense trapezius, and then saying, well, I'm going to go like this for as much of my life, as much of my day as I possibly could, would that be to your benefit? And my answer, my gut, my instinctual answer, my experiential answer is absolutely no. When you are overly contracting a muscle that is already contracted, it is designed to contract the way that we are designed to breathe without thinking. We are designed to have certain muscles tense or contracted 2% minimally toned without us trying to consciously engage. Why would we consciously engage that 2% beyond what it normally is sounds to me like it would be a disastrous.
And what muscle is that would be contracted in that over contraction?
Depends on what your definition of mula bandha is,
Which
right?
is problematic in itself.
Which is problematic in itself.
I see.
But as long as you're not urinating and defecating accidentally, you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry about it. Is of that.
Well, I've always wondered it because the in a lot of like meditative practices, it's very not a lot of like Hindu just traditionalist meditations. Not all of them, Vipassana is not of this class of meditation, but they advocate this over engagement of Mula Bandha. Yes. And I think it's to help. Actually, I think in those traditions, it's to help with the actual the breathing structure, so that you're encouraged to breathe through your yeah.
This is an important point and distinction, and you're absolutely right. Bandhas, Mula Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, are meant to be done within pranayama practices, not asana practices. What I think, two things happened with this. Yes, Mula Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha were a part of, or you can say Uddiyana Kriya. There's two different types of Uddiyanas, right? But these practices are meant to be done within pranayama, which truthfully, I have not practiced that much. I've practiced a little. There's almost no choice when you're an Ashtanga practitioner. You can't get away with not doing pranayama. It's a very difficult practice. And a lot of it has to do with what they call kumbhakas, when you retain the breath either on an inhale or on the exhale. Very difficult to do. And what you're meant to do is you're meant to contract Mula Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha. And that will help you maintain the restriction of breath. And when you're doing that's the benefit, is the control, the breath control. So how did this Mula Bandha practice, Uddiyana Bandha practice, infiltrate its way into the asana practice? In my opinion, happened in two ways. Number one is because a lot of people like to explain things away in a in what I said a
Love to hear themselves talk.
yeah, in sort of a scholarly, esoteric way, and that gives them a sort of free license to be able to answer any question without actually knowing the answer. And then number two is because I think that there were people, Indian teachers like Patabi Joyce and Bikram Chowdhury, the people that we've heard about who were living in a culture where it was not acceptable to sit next to a woman unless you were married to her, right? Or it was your mother, your sister, maybe. And then suddenly being being indoctrinated, having their teachings indoctrinated in the West, having tons of Western students like myself wearing very little clothing, females.
Poor guys. I mean, they you think about it that way, it's like Jesus Christ. I mean, it makes sense. Doesn't make sense, but you can see how those things started happening. They were just like ultra.
But here they are. Here's an excuse to say Mula Bandha Uddiyana Bandha, and there's already this physical practice, this physical adjusting that is completely acceptable and commonplace. And here's one other element that they can put into this sort of melting pot, this confusion, and say, here, Mula Bandha, let me check it. Let me make sure you're engaging Mula Bandha. Here's your Uddiyana Bandha. Here, I can touch your midriff. I can touch your butt. I can touch your vagina, and that's suddenly become acceptable under this umbrella of bandhas. And therein lies a major gray area, very weird, very sketchy, and many people just don't question it. They say, oh, well, that's yoga, that's part of this esoteric practice. Actually, it's not part of the asana practice, it's part of the pranayama practice. And it was brought into the asana practice because here we all are with little shorts and bras on.
And another question for you: this pranayama practice, was it ever advocate? Has, I mean, in your experience in Ashtanga, is it ever do they translate? Like, can you do pranayama while you're doing Ashtanga? I mean, you are supposed to
It's a
retain
separate, it's a separate practice.
separate thing.
Yes. So Ashtanga is basically the Ashtanga practice that we know, that we consider the asana practice, is one series or a group of series, the primary through six series. Likewise, the pranayama practice within the Ashtanga tradition is also a series of pranayamas that you're
Oh,
meant to practice, that have their own sequence and practice, and et cetera, et cetera. And doing all six pranayamas, relatively speaking, takes somewhere around 45 minutes to an hour to practice.
Iyengar was a master of this, right? With of the pranayama.
Truthfully, I don't know, but I think that Iyengar probably did a different pranayamas than what the quote unquote Ashtanga pranayama practitioners do.
There's this crazy. Have you seen that video of that guy do of Iyengar doing the like the minute long breath, the inhale on stage? He does it with the microphone.
I haven't seen exactly what you're talking about, but I've certainly heard of things along those lines. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if it's a minute or if it's 2 minutes. He does it for a ridiculously long amount of time. But at the same time, your point about Wim Hof, it's kind of like there are people today. Wim Hof. What's this guy that the healer guy that does Joe Dispenza? Have you heard of Joe Dispenza?
Yeah.
Joe Dispenza. There's quite a few of them now. These modern day like spiritual. They're not even spiritual rock stars because they're actually very spiritual. They do these crazy things that normal human beings, well, I shouldn't say normal human beings. I think we're all capable of them, but perhaps haven't untapped that potential.
Well, I think that the thing is that people like that, Joe Dispenza, Wim Hof, and I'm sure others that I don't know or am overlooking, um, there's something very sincere about them saying that it's we're not special. You can do it too. And I think that that is a really important quality of a quote unquote teacher, healer, and leader, is there isn't this segregation or this separation saying I'm the guru, I'm the teacher, I can do it, but you're going to be a peasant practicing these karmas, continuously through your lifetimes. There should be this element of, hey, if I can do something, I know that the potential is in all of us, and if I have some knowledge that you don't have, the idea is to pull it out of the student or to pull it out of whoever is standing in front of you. And that is essentially the gift of a teacher. The teachers are just taking over the role of what our parents couldn't do as we continue to age, as we continue into adulthood. We're just finding the way, and that's what a true teacher should be doing. It's not, oh, here, look at me, I can, look what I can do. It's here, you can do it too.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in the Ashtanga tradition, and it's not a lot of it. I mean, you see it though. It's in any tradition, really. It's not just Ashtanga, but
It's, yeah, I'm not sitting here meant to bash it. As I said, there's good that can be extracted. The thing that I'm sort of bashing or anti is, I guess you can say, I'm anti-establishment.
yes, I feel it. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure, and rightly so. It's the tradition is alive,
yeah.
for sure. Well, we're at an hour and a half day. We've been chatting away.
Well, listen, William, let's say goodbye. People probably don't want to listen to us that much, but
We did just lose some viewers. We were fluctuating between, but now we lost some viewers now. So I think people. I was gonna say, like, I was thinking to myself, when Day and I stop chatting about yoga, I'm just gonna ask her what she thinks about aliens.
they're out there.
Dude, have you seen this stuff that's coming out right now? This triangular. Did you see this story that just came out about this triangular UFO that they found that came out of the ocean, and they have like an iPhone video of it, and it's like a huge scandal that the government doesn't want to release it.
Or the government did release it just to distract us from everything else that's going on, so we're more worried about aliens than
Once they play the alien card, we know there's some shit about to go down.
look out is all I have to say.
I'm looking, Day. I'm yeah, I know. I'm getting ready right now to make some moves. I know that COVID, it's kind of, we're coming out of the COVID era, so it's time to make some moves. But yeah, we definitely gotta be on our toes.
Yeah.
I was watching the JRE about that today. The reason I was going to ask you that is because did you hear about this? There was an encounter in 1994 in Zimbabwe where an alien spacecraft landed at a school, and 100 students had an encounter, some of them within arm's reach of beings that telepathically warned them of the dangers of technology, and that some of the things that people are doing today on the earth with technology are going to ruin the earth. I was listening to that today, I'm like, Jesus Christ, dude, that is just like, and it's school children. I mean, there are various accounts, and there's a documentary that just came out, and it's very compelling, very, very compelling. And even people, one of the guys that was involved in the documentary, his wife heard the accounts of the children when they were telling this. A lot of these children they're grown up now, this was in 94, haven't even told their significant others because they were just so tired of being just rejected and having to defend themselves. So a lot of their partners didn't even know. But this guy's partner that was involved with making the documentary, she said, Jesus Christ, that is the most incredible thing I have ever heard. Like, these kids are not lying. And it's it's quite a compelling scene. But that freaked me out. I mean, the alien thing, I Bob Lazar and everything. I don't discount. I think aliens are real, right? They're out there. But that that they would come and give that telepathic message that technology is to be we have to be careful of it, was like, Jesus Christ, dude. Like, that is not that far out. I mean, it's already happening, dude. It's already happening.
I think this. I'll say this. I'm sure that we're not alone in the world.
Oh yeah. It could even be interdimensional. It doesn't even necessarily need to be that they're from other planets.
Yeah, we don't know, but we're not alone, I'm sure.
which is kind of fun too. And there's aliens. I mean, at least Netflix is getting fucking boring, dude. I mean, I need some spice in my life. Some aliens, nice lady. We'll see. But anyway,
I believe in you, Will.
yeah. Well, now I need to get to over to you and get a nice private class. I need this new updated day one method technique because that sounds like it's pretty cool. I wasn't ever allowed to do second series. Not that that's what I want, but I know there's some good stuff in there that, and I can't do back bends. You know, I've always been a back bend. I've never been able to do them because of it hurts. So if you have some alternatives, that's awesome, and that you're not doing upward dog. That's
Yeah.
pretty awesome too. I don't like upward dog. That's
I
that specific pose I don't like. I love it that sorry to interrupt you. I love it that you
yeah.
have things in your method that I find in my practice, like they arise within my practice. Like, dude, this isn't working, and then the thought comes in my head. Wait. Day does this or doesn't do this, and then it's like, oh shit, I do it or I don't do it. I'm like, dude, you already heard this, man. You could have incorporated this like a year ago. You know, I love that.
Well, you can reach out whenever. Likewise to anyone who's listening. Email me or message me. Day One Yoga, I'm very easy to find. So
You're on Instagram, you're on Facebook, you're on all the major platforms, right?
yeah, but I do have to say that like everything that I post is through Instagram. So I'm not on Facebook very much. I will receive messages, but I'm slower. So if
Okay.
you want like an immediate response, like if you DM me on Instagram, that would be a better way. And
What
my website is day1yoga.com.
day1yoga.com. That's your handle also on Instagram, correct?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, Day, this was awesome. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll talk soon, I hope.
Yes, we will. And I hope to be there soon practicing with you, doing some day one yoga method because it's the new cool age of Aquarius, baby.
It is.
Gotta adapt.
It is.
All right, Day.
All right.
All right. Bye bye. Thanks.